Welcome back. I'm getting back on the 1970 Chevelle. Gonna be working on making a hood fit today. I did run into some issues when I took this fender off to fit the doors. So here's what I found once I took this fender off. Got a bunch of damage right here on this outside of this cowl. And if you've seen a previous video when I repaired this door, this is the one that the edge was ground off of. Once I got into here, it'd been repaired. There was Bondo in here and it was brazed in. It kind of gave me a clue. I knew something was going on here. This damage wasn't from an impact out here. It was an impact from the front, driving this back. So I kind of expected this. Now, the next thing I found when I went to put the fender on, this top bolt hole right here was way off. The actual fender hole is right in this area. I had to grind that bracket out to make that bolt fit. So what happened, this car was in a collision at one time on the left front, drove this back, and this kind of accordioned in. This has got to be pushed back somewhat. It was real common in the day when these things get hit on the fender hard enough, it would shove this whole cowl back. And the door fits nice. There's enough adjustment in here, and I don't think anybody ever pulled on this. They just made the fender fit the car. Even this top bolt for the fender here will line up. It's a little bit off, but it still goes in there. So most of the damage was here, but this got driven back too. And I'd almost guarantee from that collision, this windshield would have broke. And if you try and pull this out now and repair it, you'd probably break the windshield. So it's just gonna get put back together. Everything will fit good. And I'm guessing this car was probably wrecked back in the 70s or early 80s by when I seen this brass in here. Another thing I didn't mention, just like when I was doing the doors and the deck lid, you always take the striker or the latch out of there so it doesn't interfere with anything while you're trying to line it up. The core support bolts I loosened up also. I wanted to be able to shift that core support around wherever it needs to go to mount up to the fender. I didn't want that tight. If that would bind up, it wouldn't let me even fit the back of the fender to the door. So once the hood is all lined up, everything, all the sheet metal is looking good, then I'll tighten these up. All right, door and fender's on. It doesn't look too bad. The fender is kind of crowned out a little bit right here, just like on the other side. Everything looks pretty good until we get down to the bottom here. This fender really sticks out from the rock. If I push this in and get it flush with the rocker, it looks like the door sticks out way too far. The door open and closes good, and everywhere else looks pretty good. So we're gonna have to live with that. So let's get on this hood. Okay, the biggest issue with this hood or the hinges, these are aftermarket hinges. And when I got this car, you can't hardly open or close the hood. Something is binding up. And at first I thought, well, maybe those springs are too tight, that's why you can't close it, but you also can't get it open. If those springs were too strong, it ought to just pop this hood right up, but you really got to struggle to get it up or get it down. It doesn't fit in the opening. And I talked to the owner last night. He's got the original hinges. He's going to bring those by today if I can't make these work. First thing I'm going to do is take this striker off, just like the doors and the deck lid. You can't line anything up if you got a latch in your way to interfere. So let me take this off. And I hope these things aren't in the way, one on each side. For starters, this hood is shifted over to the right about 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to loosen up the rear bolts on the hinge to the hood here. Leave these snug by getting over on the right side, pushing the hood to the left. It may give me a little bit of pivot right there. Then I'll snug it up, and if that doesn't do it, then I just have to physically push that whole hood over and get these hinges to tweak. I don't know if that moved on the bolts or not, but I still got a little bit wider gap on this side than that side, so I'm just going to push on it. Okay, it needs a little bit more persuasion. Now I'm going to put a little bit of oil on these hinges. It looks like where they pivot here, it's got the paint all gouged up. It looks like there's just a lot of tension. Those rivets might be too tight in there. Another thing I see, that hood sticks up a mile in the back on both sides. I've got the hinges on the fenders all the way up. I don't think there's that much adjustment to move it down, but I'm gonna see what happens. Okay, the hood also has to go straight back about 1/4 of an inch. You can see how the hood overhangs the fender by about 1/4 of an inch. Those are gonna be hitting. So both sides are the same. I'm gonna get that shifted back. This one I didn't have much room to go. Maybe it only moved maybe 1/8 of an inch amount of adjustment. This side had all kinds of room. It helps some, but I need to get the back of that hood down, and that may shift this around even more. I put my prop rod in here, and I want to push up on the front of this hood as much as I can, and I'm going to loosen the back bolts on those hinges into the fender, and that should let it pivot back, get those down as low as I can, tighten them up, and then I'll loosen up the front bolts and kind of pull it down, and that should drop them down even. Okay, that dropped quite a bit. Let's tighten them up, see what happened. Now, take the prop rod out. I'll loosen those front bolts and see if that'll drop down. I think this one was down all the way anyway. Okay, it still sticks up in the back, but what it also did is made this hood go back even farther. So now I could bring it forward, and then I'll deal with the back. That's not too bad. Here's what we used to have to do with these hoods. It was real common years ago for once these hinges got worn, they had some age on them, the hoods would actually start coming up from the fenders. You old timers out there, if you remember back in early 70s, if you had a Ford Galaxy or an LTD, they were notorious for doing that. Within 4 or 5 years of being new, that hood would probably stick up 2 inches from the back. So the cure for that was just to manhandle it. Grab the front of this hood and you just start pushing up on it, and I'm not sure exactly what it does to the hinge or the hood, but it'll start dropping it. I don't know if it'll work in this case because we're dealing with a bunch of aftermarket parts and there's no wear on those hinges, so I'm going to try it, see what happens. Well, I still need about a 1/2 inch out of it. It's actually getting better. It's actually not bad. It's coming down. It's just a hair up, maybe 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little less than that, but it is taking the hood back, so I'll have to slide it forward again. Okay, after repeated manhandling and the required amount of cuss words, let me show you what I ended up with. I think the biggest issue with these hinges was just they're stiff. The oil seemed to help. This side of the hood was up maybe a 1/16 of an inch. Just from going up and down with it, playing with it, and trying to get the other side down, this side's actually a little bit lower than the fender. So that can actually come up. This side is still high. And there's nothing here that's holding it up because I can push it down and it stays down. I think that hinge is just going to have to loosen up. These things, I adjusted these so they're in the right spot. The hood looks good on the front. Let me tell you what's going to happen with this car. Okay, this is the last week of October. You're probably going to see this video sometime spring of 2024. In the meantime, I'm going to wrap this thing up on the front end. Probably going to be done today. The owner is going to take the car home with him over the winter. He's got a bunch of stuff he wants to work on. The hood may come back to me in the spring. You can see a lot of low spots like dents from stamping. They're going to need to be filled, reprimed, and blocked. So the hood will probably come off in the spring, so that can get taken care of. I'm thinking over the winter that hinge is going to loosen up enough. From the owner working on it, it's going to be open and closed quite a bit. And if there's still an issue, then I may put the factory hinge back on it. So for right now, I'm going to leave it where it is. Okay, next, I've got a fun fact for you kids. You're probably seeing these bolts sticking up right here. There's one on this side, there's one on the other. And you're thinking, that's a hood stop. That thing is sticking up too far and the hood's hitting on it. Well, let me tell you what that is. That is not a hood stop. Right behind this hinge, there's a big hole in here. And when you drop that hood down, that bolt goes up inside of here. Let me tell you what that's for. Okay, with the hood closed, that hinge comes back into here, that bolt sticks up behind that hinge and inside the hood. And there's a safety reason for that. In case of a major front-end collision, there's a chance this hood could get sheared off its hinges, driven through the windshield, hit the occupants in the car, and decapitate them. So I'm guessing back in the 60s, the car manufacturers went over their allowed quota for decapitations, and the government stepped in and says, you guys are gonna have to do better. So they thought, let's put a couple bolts back here. That'll take care of it. Okay, next I've got a little bit wider gap on this side at the fender and the hood than I do on this side. So I want to shift the core support over just a little bit to the left side, where I'm going to use a porta power with the duck bill. Just put a little bit of pressure on it, maybe a 1/16 of an inch, maybe an 1/8 of an inch. With these rubber mounts on here, sometimes you have to go just a little bit over, because when you tighten it up, the rubber mounts will pull it back to where it was. So once I get that set, then we can put the latch in the hood. Next, I'm going to get this striker in, get this lined up with the latch. I'm going to just snug these up by hand, and I want to drop it down into here, and it should center itself if I leave it loose enough. Then I could snug it up, and then we'll drop it, see how it fits. These latches really never were a good idea. It's almost impossible to see what's going on with it. I think it needs to get slid forward a little bit more. Okay, I slid it forward a little bit. Let me see what it does. It's actually dropping in. Okay, it's closing. Okay, I need the hood to go to the right, which means I have to take the striker and move it to the left. And that sounds backwards, because cars today, the striker is fixed and you adjust the latch to move the hood. Here, the latch is fixed and you move the striker. So to get the hood to go to the right, I need the striker to go to the opposite way. I'm going to tighten everything up, and it should be good. Now, if you need a height adjustment on the hood, that's what this bolt does. There's this jam nut here, and it's got a screwdriver slot in it. You loosen up this jam nut, and you could run that bolt up or down depending on how your hood has to fit. If it's sticking up too high, and if it's kind of rocking on the latch and not hitting the fenders, you run this bolt up in there, and then get it where you need it, tighten the jam nut up. But this seems to be hitting real good. Let's close it one more time, see how it looks. It actually looks pretty good. I got good gaps. It's nice and solid. The hood doesn't move up and down. I know these car guys don't like getting grease on stuff, but to work correctly, it needs to be lubricated. So I won't get too carried away. Yeah, maybe I will. Opens and closes like a classic 1970 should. You can actually do it with one hand now instead of 2 hands, 2 feet, and all your back muscles. Okay, I've got the headlight bezels on, and I was thinking there was a little bit of an offset in here, but it's actually even with the fender, so when I shut the hood, it was real tight. So I slid the hood back a little bit, give me a nice gap, and then I also had to pull this latch forward a little bit too, so it lines up good. Actually, everything come out pretty nice. Okay, for the time being, this project is done. It's kind of been a fun project. Some of the stuff is challenging, but these old cars usually are. So I hope you like this series. If you did, leave me some comments. Let me know what you thought of it. And like I said, it may be back in the spring, maybe the hood, maybe some other stuff, so we'll see then. Thanks for watching.